Alright, so I'm looking at this Mexican card, and I gotta say, I'm sorry, but it is absolute trash. Alright? Like, these Mexican fans are literally risking their lives to get into the arena, and the best the UFC can put together right now is Brandon Moreno and Lunar Kavanagh for a main event fight. Like, I'm sorry, this might as well just be an Apex card, except for the fact that it's Mexican themed, alright, because we're in Mexico. But yeah, other than the fact that this card is trash, I'm still going to be breaking down every single fight that's going to be taking place on this card, starting with the early prelims, ending with the main event. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right into the video. Alright, we start off with Damian Pinas versus Wes Schultz. There was a penis joke here somewhere, but I kind of forgot about it. You know, if I remember, I'll probably say it as we talk along in this video. That being said, though, I'm going to go with Damian Pinas to beat Wes Schultz because Damian Pinas, I think he's the more dangerous and more girthy fellow over here. All right, Wes Schultz, he is decent. All right, I would pick Wes Schultz to beat a couple of guys at the bottom of the barrel in the UFC middleweight division, but I think Damian Pinas is just a step above a lot of those guys because Damian Pinas is incredibly dangerous. All right, he is athletic. He has nuclear power in his hands. He literally flatlined out another guy in the Dana White's Contender Series a couple of months back. And sure, Wes Schultz did get a first-round submission win over his opponent, but outside of him being able to ragdoll people, he has a couple of losses. Like, losing to Dylan Budka, like, I don't care if this was a long time ago. If you're losing to Dylan Budka at any point in your career, I'm going to have certain doubts when you're fighting, like, a dangerous prospect. And I think Damian Pinas is going to flatline Wes Schultz and give him back shots dead. So yeah, Damian Pinas, I'm going to pick him to knock out Wes Schultz within the first 2 rounds. Moving on to Erik Silva versus Francis Marshall. Why is Erik Silva still signed in the UFC? The guy has 2 fights under the promotion since 2022. He lost both of them. And let's just say the guys he was fighting, they're not all that good. All right. Now, Francis Marshall, his record, it does look ugly. You know, 8-3 isn't exactly the best record to have. But Francis Marshall has been fighting very tough competition. You know, Isaac Dolgarian. He lost to Marin Santos last year. But, you know, you could argue that fight for Francis Marshall. And I think I see improvements out of Francis Marshall's game. Whereas Erik Silva, I don't even remember exactly when he fought the last time. I think he's coming off a leg injury after fighting Muhammad Naimov, and he hasn't fought since 2024, so all the signs point to Francis Marshall. I just cannot pick someone who has fought once every 2 years and is coming off a devastating injury, but I'm going to go with Francis Marshall. I don't know. If he gets a finish, I wouldn't be shocked, but I'm going to say decision because Francis Marshall, he is improving, but he hasn't really shown me the capabilities of getting finishes consistently. So I'm going to say Francis Marshall wins this fight via decision. Up next, we got Sofia Montenegro versus Ernesta Kareckaite. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but I'm going to say Kareckaite for now. If you guys know how to pronounce it, just feel free to leave it down in the comments. But anyways, though, I'm going to go with Sofia Montenegro. She had a fight in the Dana White's Contender Series, which is why her record technically states 0-1 instead of just, I think she has like, 7 wins? I think she's like 7-1. But I'm going to be real. The Dana White's Contender Series fight that she lost, I thought Sofia Montenegro clearly won that fight. But both of them had a good scrap. It was a very entertaining women's fight, which I rarely say on this channel. And also the fact that I've seen Ernesta Kareckaite fight. She's very much a range merchant who can't really implement any sort of aggression in her game. Like, she's very good at picking her opponents apart at range, but the second the fight gets gritty, like, I just don't see anything special from Ernesta Kareckaite. Whereas Sofia Montenegro, she beats the crap out of her opponents. and she trudges in and risks getting hit back in order to deal a lot of damage. And I just like that, especially in the unranked sections of women's MMA, because most women, like, they just try to fight all technically and pretty, like, they don't really grit down. And I think Sofia Montenegro can separate herself from women like Ernesta Kareckaite by being gritty and just gritting down and then getting in the pocket. So I'm going to pick Sofia Montenegro to tune up Ernesta Kareckaite over the course of 3 rounds. And I'm going to say that Montenegro, she really solidifies herself as a prospect to be out on the lookout for in the women's flyweight division. Moving on to Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Javier Reyes. I think you got to go with Javier Reyes on this one because, I'm sorry, Douglas Silva de Andrade is 40 years old. I mean, sure, at one point he was pretty decent, but I think he's well past his prime. He looked awful against Miles Johns, who is basically a bottom-of-the-barrel bantamweight. And now Douglas Silva de Andrade is moving up to featherweight to fight Javier Reyes. And sure, you could say that Javier Reyes has a lot of losses outside of the UFC. You know, he did get TKO'd by, I think his name is Douglas Lima. I forgot exactly who, but there's another guy in the Contender Series this year that fought Javier Reyes and knocked him out. But I think Javier Reyes, overall, he's solid. And I think Douglas Silva de Andrade is just way past his prime. And I think the size difference is going to be apparent because Douglas Silva de Andrade should not be fighting at featherweight. So I'm going to pick Javier Reyes to TKO Douglas Silva de Andrade. And I'm going to say that it's going to be a brutal one, especially because Andrade is like 40 years old and he should honestly consider retirement. Moving on to Christian Quinonez versus Kris Moutinho. You know what? I'm going to go with Kris Moutinho on this one, all right? I'm sorry, but Christian Quinonez, first off, he hasn't fought in 2 years, all right? I think his last fight was in 2024, and he has not looked great in either of his fights that he lost over the last couple of years. He lost to Raoni Barcelos, which is fair enough. Raoni Barcelos is arguably top 15 in the bantamweight division. But then he lost to Kyung Ho Kang before that. And although I root for my Korean brethren, I'm sorry, but Kyung Ho Kang, he's just not all that good. And the fact that Christian Quinonez got submitted by him, it just does not give me confidence as to why Christian Quinonez is such a heavy favorite for this fight. And fair enough, Kris Moutinho, he hasn't really had any statement-making performances. He has looked kind of mid, but that's against, like, Malcolm Wellmaker and Sean O'Malley. I don't think getting flatlined by Malcolm Wellmaker is that bad of a look. And Kris Moutinho, if you do not knock him out and tee off on his face, he can implement a heavy grappling approach. And Christian Quinonez has not been able to really show me anything in terms of the grappling that makes me all confident. Like, again, the guy got submitted by Kyung Ho Kang like a couple of years back, and he hasn't really fought that many fights since. So I'm going to go with Kris Moutinho for a crafty underdog pick. Will I regret this if Christian Quinonez just flatlines Kris Moutinho because Moutinho's chin just got obliterated by Malcolm Wellmaker? Yes, but I'm going to bet on the fact that Christian Quinonez is not Malcolm Wellmaker. He does not have that crazy one-punch hitter-quitter. And I think overall, Christian Quinonez, despite having an impressive record of 18-5, I don't think he's all that. And I think that Kris Moutinho, he's been more active, and there is a path of victory for him, which is the grappling. So I'm going to go with Kris Moutinho to win either via decision or by late round submission. All right, moving on, we got Ailen Perez versus Macy Chiasson. The cheeks are going to be front and center for us to enjoy because Ailen Perez is going to ragdoll Macy Chiasson over the course of 3 rounds. Like, did I rate Macy Chiasson at some point? Yes, but that was when she beat Mayra Bueno Silva via doctor stoppage. And I'm not going to lie, it's not the fact that Macy Chiasson's a world beater, it's just that Mayra Bueno Silva is cheeks. And I just can't ignore the fact that Macy Chiasson, she has looked awful in her last couple of fights, especially against Ketlen Vieira, where Ketlen Vieira was able to take her down at will. And even in the Yana Santos fight, and I don't even rate Yana Santos all that highly, Macy Chiasson could not outstrike Yana Santos despite coming in with like a 5-pound advantage because she missed weight. Ailen Perez, on the other hand, I think she's a solid bantamweight, alright? I think she's top 5 caliber. She has been consistently ragdolling every single one of her opponents. And overall, I would say she has a very solid grappling game. The only people I could see matching her grappling are either Ketlin Vieira, Kayla Harrison, but, you know, it's Macy Chiasson. Alright, I think Ailen Perez has a clear path to victory here. I'm going to say that Ailen Perez is going to either ragdoll her to a comfortable dominant decision or even get a submission win because Ailen Perez's submission game is pretty good. But either way, Ailen Perez should win this fight. And if she doesn't beat Macy Chiasson, I'm going to have to reevaluate my stance on women's bantamweight. But overall, I think Ailen Perez is a solid fighter, whereas Macy Chiasson, on the other hand, I thought that she was a world beater when she beat Mayra Bueno Silva, but it just turns out that Mayra Bueno Silva is absolute dog shit. Now, I don't even remember watching Ryan Gandra's fight, but off the principle that it's Jose Daniel Medina, I'm going with Ryan Gandra to win this fight. By submission, KO, I don't care, right? Because Jose Daniel Medina should not belong in the UFC. He has lost 4 fights consecutively, all by finish, I believe. And Jose Daniel Medina, it's not like he has shown me anything that's like an upside outside of his chin. Because outside of his chin, the guy is a walking bag of milk that fighters use as more of a punching bag rather than a fight. Jose Daniel Medina is not UFC caliber. I mean, the guy that Ryan Gandra flatlined out cold in the first round is objectively a better fighter than Jose Daniel Medina. So the fact that Jose Daniel Medina signed on the UFC roster, it just doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. But I think Ryan Gandra is going to flatline Jose Daniel Medina. Maybe it's a submission, but either way, it's going to be a clear win for Ryan Gandra because at the end of the day, it's Jose Daniel Medina, and Jose Daniel Medina does not belong in the UFC. Moving on, we got Santiago Luna versus Angel Pacheco. I'm going to go with Santiago Luna with this one. Very similar to the Jose Medina syndrome. Angel Pacheco, I struggle to figure out whether or not he belongs in the UFC. I don't think the guy's won a fight since he's joined the UFC. And he hasn't really fought all that much. I think he has had, 2 fights so far over the last 4 years. Why is this guy still signed here? I don't understand. But as for Santiago Luna, though, do I think he's the best? No, but he did beat Quang Le, and I think Quang Le is an objective better fighter than Angel Pacheco. I mean, I don't know why the UFC even gave Santiago Luna Angel Pacheco after he flatlined Quang Le in the first round, because Quang Le is very decent, and Angel Pacheco is objectively worse than Quang Le. So I'm going to go with Santiago Luna to flatline Angel Pacheco. Maybe it's a submission. I don't even care. Like, it's just going to be a dust-up from Santiago Luna. And you'll also know the fact that the UFC love their Mexican prospects. So this is basically a layup for Santiago Luna to fight. And I think Santiago Luna should beat Angel Pacheco within the first 2 rounds. Moving on, we got Imanol Rodriguez versus Kevin Borjas. I'm going to go with Imanol Rodriguez on this one. Like, Kevin Borjas, like, was there a time where I thought he was pretty decent? Yes. I did pick him to beat Ronaldo Rodriguez, but Ronaldo Rodriguez is absolute cheeks. So I don't know how much I can rate that win. And outside of that, Kevin Borjas, he has not had a great UFC track record. And it feels like anytime he gets like a decent step up in competition, Kevin Borjas just doesn't have the answers to beating any of the top 30 guys in the flyweight division. And fair enough, Imanol Rodriguez, he is making his debut. And record-wise, he is relatively inexperienced. But based off what I'm seeing on the eye test, you know, especially after his Dana White Contender Series fight, I think Imanol Rodriguez has the boxing that's just clearly better than Kevin Borjas. And I think over the course of 3 rounds, Imanol Rodriguez will put belt to ass on Kevin Borjas. And even in the Ultimate Fighter, you know, losing to Joseph Morales is not a bad look, all right? Joseph Morales is one of the best unranked prospects in the flyweight division right now, so I think Imanol Rodriguez is going to make a statement performance against Kevin Borjas, and I think Imanol Rodriguez is going to dust up Kevin Borjas within the first 2 rounds of this fight. Moving on, we got Edgar Chairez versus Felipe Bunes. I'm going to go with Edgar Chairez on this one. You know, Edgar Chairez, although he has lost to Tatsuro Taira and Joshua Van, he gave them very tough fights. And everybody else, I know he's been fighting nothing but bums outside of those 2 names, but Edgar Chairez has been able to dust them up with relative ease. So I think Edgar Chairez, he's very underrated. When I look at Felipe Bunes, at the other hand, like, he has had a lot of losses. His only win recently is against Jose Johnson, and I don't think Jose Johnson is UFC caliber. I think he got cut from the UFC recently, so I don't really rate Felipe Bunes' wins recently, and he's just lost way too many times. I think there's going to be a clear advantage for Edgar Chairez on the feet. The only way Felipe Bunes can win a fight is if he can get a submission off bottom, but Edgar Chairez has shown me solid jiu-jitsu, and there's just a clear difference on the feet, so I'm going to go with Edgar Chairez to, I want to say TKO Felipe Bunes. Like, Bunes has been TKO'd in the past by Joshua Van. Not that it's a bad look, but it's like, yeah, you can't be getting TKO'd that many times and losing consistently. I'm going to go with Edgar Chairez to easily dust up Felipe Bunes. And I think Edgar Chairez, 1-2 more fights, and he's going to deserve a ranked opponent in the flyweight division. All right, moving on, we got Daniel Zellhuber versus Bobby Green. I'm not calling him King, alright? It's gonna be Bobby Green for me all the time. I'm gonna go with Daniel Zellhuber to win this fight. Now, I did say this, that Daniel Zellhuber is incredibly mid. And, I picked Michael Johnson to beat him at the age of 39. But the difference between Michael Johnson and Bobby Green here is that Bobby Green, he especially loves to keep his hands low. He always acts like he's too cool for this fight and then gets flatlined by anybody half decent. And I think Daniel Zellhuber, I don't think it's going to be a flatline, but I think Daniel Zellhuber has the offensive capabilities to just wear down a Bobby Green. Because Bobby Green, he's not used to opponents just throwing kicks nonstop to his face. And Daniel Zellhuber, although he doesn't do much in between all the kicks that he throws a lot of kicks and jabs. And I think Bobby Green is going to have to be very honest in this fight and keep a tight guard, because I feel like one of those head kicks comes through, he's going to sleep, right? And I've just seen Bobby Green getting flatlined way too many times. And sure, Daniel Zellhuber doesn't have a flatline KO in the UFC so far, but it's just the way that Bobby Green fights. Like, he beat Lance Gibson Jr. in his last fight, but Lance Gibson Jr. is not UFC caliber. Whereas Daniel Zellhuber, although I don't think he's the best, he is UFC caliber. Alright, he has a couple of wins in the UFC. And based on the stylistic matchup, I don't see Bobby Green really being able to just consistently defend all the head kicks. And at some point, I think Daniel Zellhuber is going to catch Bobby Green with a head kick in order to either drop him badly or possibly get a TKO finish. So I'm going to go with Daniel Zellhuber to just kick at rage nonstop against Bobby Green. And it's not even like Bobby Green really has crazy offense and speed like Michael Johnson. Like, yes, he has the speed, but Bobby Green, he doesn't throw first, right? He's very bad at throwing first, and I think Daniel Zellhuber is going to have a much easier time figuring out Bobby Green than when he figures out Michael Johnson in the year of 2025. So yeah, I'm going to go with Daniel Zellhuber to win this fight pretty comfortably. Moving on, we got Marlon Chito Vera versus David Dr. Martinez. I think it's a no-brainer here. You got to go with David Dr. Martinez because it's Marlon Chito Vera in the year of 2026. All right, I'm sorry, Marlon Chito Vera has not looked great since 2022. Like, even in his one win against Pedro Munoz, they both looked incredibly mid in that fight. And sure, I don't think David Martinez is the best, but I think he's good enough to beat Marlon Chito Vera at this point. Like, if the only way you can win is by fluke head kick or going to a mid decision, I don't want to pick Marlon Chito Vera to win any single fight in the rankings of the bantamweight division. And David Martinez, although I thought Rob Font could have arguably won their fight, he looked really good, and he did take that fight on short notice. So I think David Martinez will just output against Marlon Chito Vera over the course of 3 rounds. It was really impressive over the fact that David Martinez kept up that explosivity throughout 3 rounds of a fight. And I just haven't seen any sort of changes in Marlon Chito Vera's game since 2022. Right? That is a long time. And until Marlon Chito Vera wins a fight, I can't pick Marlon Chito Vera to win, especially considering the only way Marlon Chito Vera wins is by fluking a head kick out of nowhere after getting beat up over the course of the majority of the fight. So I'm going to go with David Martinez to out-decision Marlon Chito Vera over the course of 3 rounds. Moving on, we got Brandon Moreno versus Loner Kavanagh for the main event. I really like Loner Kavanagh. I think he can do very well even if he loses this fight right after. But the problem here is that Loner Kavanagh is taking this on short notice against an arguable top 5 contender in Brandon Moreno. Like, I'm sorry, I cannot pick Loner Kavanagh to beat Brandon Moreno on 4 weeks' notice when he was preparing for a 3-rounder against Bruno Silva. Like, Loner Kavanagh, he even lost his last fight against Charles Johnson. And even in that fight, I was like, yeah, Loner Kavanagh, I don't think this is a good idea for him. It's going to be too soon. And now he's fighting someone who's objectively better than Charles Johnson. And Brandon Moreno, sure, he lost to Tatsuro Taira. Is Loner Kavanagh just going to ragdoll Brandon Moreno over the course of 5 rounds? No, that's not even Loner Kavanagh's style. So I don't even think that's a good idea to use just because, oh, he lost to Tatsuro Taira. What if Brandon Moreno's washed? Like, no. Brandon Moreno's still solid. Tatsuro Taira is arguably the best grappler in the flyweight division right now. And Loner Kavanagh, even when you watch him fight, it's like, he's fun. And he has a lot of potential, but he's going to close decisions with Felipe Dos Santos, Jose Ochoa. I think Brandon Moreno is way better than Jose Ochoa and Felipe Dos Santos. All right. I think Brandon Moreno, also the fact that he has an experience advantage. This is Loner Kavanagh's first 5-round fight after all. And I don't see a flatline KO for Loner Kavanagh, especially as the fight progresses. So I'm going to go with Brandon Moreno to just piece up Loner Kavanagh over the course of 5 rounds. Maybe even a TKO in the later rounds of the fight. But either way, Brandon Moreno, if he doesn't get flatlined in the first round, I think Brandon Moreno will be able to comfortably outpoint Loner Kavanagh for at least 4 rounds to 1. And I wouldn't be shocked if it's a flatline KO because Loner Kavanagh, he just got flatlined KO by Charles Johnson. And I think Brandon Moreno, maybe he doesn't have the power of a Charles Johnson, but I think he's an objectively better striker than Charles Johnson, in my opinion. Alright, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys want to see more videos like this, please make sure to like and subscribe so we can monetize this channel. But otherwise, leave any comments down below for video suggestions you have for me. And outside of that, I will see you guys next time. Peace.